If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer, however, you probably know that I mostly play in best of 3, but I do have a plethora of videos that are playing best of 1 as well. Many of the other channels that I see out there on YouTube play almost 100% in best of 1, and if you want to be a well-rounded Magic the Gathering player, I think that is a mistake, and we are going to get into that in just a moment. Now, I understand why other channels play mostly best of 1. First off, you only have to think about a 60 card deck. You don't have to worry about a sideboard and wonder what the weaknesses of said deck will be. You are mostly trying to come up with a combo, surprise your opponent, and win the game. That's where best of 1 is strongest. Best of 1 players have the element of surprise on their hand. If I were to take this deck into the arena, and I know this is not the best deck in the world, but it is a deck that can surprise some folks in a best of 1 scenario only. That is where the strength of best of 1 is. It's easier to construct the deck, and you don't have to think about overall weaknesses if you have surprise as an element on your side. Now, I've played a lot of best of 1 with things like the Gruul aggro deck, where I'm just trying to get damage off as fast as humanly possible, or the Artisan Muffin Man deck, where I am just trying to grow artifacts as fast as possible and end the game. The problem with this deck, though, in best of 3 is that there are weaknesses to it, and we are going to talk about why I play best of 3. First off, let's talk about events. I've been playing events lately because they've been giving me well above average returns. If you don't like these events, you don't have to play them, but think about it this way. You go into a match like this and you are faced with a bad matchup. In best of 1, there's nothing you could do about a bad matchup, but, and what we will get to in just a moment, there are things that you could do in best of 3 to make sure that your odds of winning are well above 50%, even in a matchup that doesn't quite suit your liking. If you look at a lot of the decks that I have built for best of 3, like let's say the most recent rendition of my Azorius Tokens deck. If you watched the video, thank you for joining on that one, but it's a really fun deck. It's really good. In fact, like this main board here is fantastic. We're running things like Spirited Companion, we're running into things like Takasia's Welcome, Wedding Announcements, Adelines, and Invasion of New Phyrexia. We have a lot of tools in this deck that could do a lot of things for us. Even Elish Norn, even if we have to blow up our own side of the board because the opponent is getting too dangerous, we can do that fairly easily with Elish Norn, then have an Elish Norn on the battlefield and a Mandrake against all of the opponent's nothingness. But you know, that's a good best of 1 deck. It wins a lot of the time. But what happens when the opponent has too many creatures or too much removal or board wipes, for God's sake? Almost anything that can get in this deck's way, anything like that, any kind of board wipes, any kind of control build is going to absolutely destroy this deck. And that is why we actually come to bear with a sideboard. We have the negates, we have the essence scatters, 4 negates actually in the sideboard. Lauren of the Third Pass, if they have a lot of artifacts that they are using, Lauren comes in, does her job. If we are having trouble keeping things on the battlefield and the opponent has a decent enough board state, we can always White Sun's Twilight. If they're doing graveyard shenanigans, we got a Farewell down here. The sideboard's main purpose is to fill in gaps to your deck, and if you notice with this deck specifically, which is why I chose to start talking with this deck, it doesn't have to be expensive. Yeah, we have these rares here, Farewell, and these rares here, but really these are pretty stapley cards, so crafting those can never be a bad thing if you're playing a lot of white. But you don't have to have rares down in here. You can literally have a bunch of commons and uncommons that are going to be your control pieces if you don't want to put them into your main board. If you think you could win without the control pieces, but then you're faced with a matchup where you need those control pieces, in best of 3 you have that opportunity. There are a lot of matches that I went into, even with this particular deck, where the first match, after turn 5 or 6, I just scoop it up because I know I can't win. There is that time in Magic with each and every match where you know you've either won or you have not won, and you scoop it up, you put the control pieces in here that you need in order to contend in the second round, then you take game 2 and you take game 3. That has happened so many times with this because a lot of people actually do not build sideboards right. Take a look at an example of what a good best of 1 deck is, and then we'll go back over to the best of 3 one more time and we'll discuss it there. Burn it down. If you notice, a lot of my artisan builds, a lot of my artisan decks are very much so best of 1. Why? Because we're trying to surprise the opponent. We're trying to get in and out of these matches fast. Claim the firstborn. And where is it? Collateral damage. I built this deck around the idea of having claim the firstborn, gain control of a target creature with mana value 3 or less, untap that creature. For 1, this is phenomenal. And then collateral damage, you sack a creature, deal 3 damage to any target, right? If the opponent sees this once, first off, it is fantastic in best of 1 because you get to gain control of that early game creature that's supposed to stabilize the board for your opponent, say like a Thalia or something. You take control of it, you swing with it, you deal damage with it, you sacrifice it, you deal 3 damage to any other target, killing either another creature or doing 3 to the face. Generally, that's enough to actually kill the opponent. In best of 1, that is phenomenal. But in best of 3, pushback's going to kill it. Almost anything is going to get rid of that combination, because even if you gain control of this and they murder that creature immediately, you're stuck with the collateral damage in your hand. And the opponent could be sideboarding pieces that allow this combination not to happen as often as I would like it to happen. So that's why this is strictly like a best of 1, try to rush your opponent down deck. Now, let's look at another aggro build that I have for best of 3. Still, probably my favorite deck. I'm taking this into historic events right now and probably going to come out with a video on it if you guys would like to see that. But this deck right here is a fantastic best of 3 deck, and on the surface all it does is makes small artifacts really big with all that glitters and Mashiko's Reign of Truth. That's all it really does on the surface, but when you dig into the sideboard, this is where the true magic of this deck happens. We have counter spells in here. If the opponent is playing a control deck, we're going to be wanting to run these Metallic Rebukes, but we don't want them in the main board because we cannot use Loris of the Dream Den if we do have these in the main board. So we don't have any control at all if we want to use Loris as our companion, but I do. So I'm going to play these pieces in the sideboard. Same with the glass caskets, which gives us a little bit more control. Say if we're going up against goblins, 4 portable holes are not going to do it. So we need these glass caskets on the sideboard in order to make sure that the opponent can't start building their momentum, right? We don't want the momentum to start building for that stuff. Then let's say we're facing like what would you say that Gruul deck that combos off of creatures coming into the battlefield. Hushbringer shuts that deck down. Flying, lifelink, creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Is this good in every situation or even most situations? No, but whenever it is essential for you to have to shut down creatures entering the battlefield triggers, then you want these on your sideboard. You really do. It shuts down a lot of the decks in Historic completely. But if it is in your main board over here, the card is virtually worthless. You're going to draw this worthless 90% of the time. So people who are making sideboards and playing best of 3 have more appreciation for cards like the Hushbringer. I would never main deck this card ever in Historic, but as a sideboard piece, it is a staple in almost everything playing white. That is the power of the sideboard, and that is why we bring to bear things like the Hushbringer. It allows us to gain more control over the battlefield. It allows us to get deeper into games. So on the surface, this deck has a lot of stay power with the innovative meta tech, and the Esper Sentinel drawing those cards is fantastic. But if we're matched up against something that we can't handle, like Atraxa, Metallic Rebuke counters Atraxa. Otherwise, Atraxa deck just wins. It's either Atraxa deck just wins with a best of one scenario, or we actually have a shot in a best of three thing to come back and actually do some damage and actually get a win or two off on the opponent, depending on how often we're drawing these Metallic Rebukes. That is why I am a big proponent of best of three, especially with either control builds or mid-range builds. If we take this Mardu tokens deck that I built a while back into consideration for a little bit, you have your wedding announcements, welcoming vampires, of course your wandering emperors, the staples of these colors, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Mondrake, and a Archangel of Wrath. Great control piece. I really like this piece. And Reckoner Bankbusters, very, very, very common staples. But you go into these matches, and what if they don't have anything with 5 or less power, right? This is not a fast deck. What if they come in with artifact creatures? Well, we have our sideboard here to kind of handle those situations. In the sideboard, I wanted to make sure to have duresses if they have a control-y build. Another cut down, Unlicensed Hearse to get rid of graveyard stuff, Liliana of the Veil in case they have artifact creatures and stuff like that, Shieldred's Edict in case they have planeswalkers, which this Shieldred's Edict will hit. Lorna of the Third Path, of course, is going after artifacts as well, and a couple depopulates and a couple farewells, which could also exile graveyards. If you haven't noticed, I built this deck in the peak of whenever people were using graveyards like every single match. It was all over YouTube, it was all over the arena, it was everywhere. So I built this deck in a response to that, and it kind of shut down all of those graveyard shenanigans that we were seeing from opponents for a long time, and I really appreciated this deck. But I would definitely do things differently with this now that that stuff has calmed down and we have moved on from that era in the arena. But that just goes to show that this deck is much better in best of three than it is in best of one. In best of one, any kind of board wipe is going to just tear us apart. Any kind of graveyard decks are just going to tear us apart with this particular build. But the sideboard handles most of those things fairly effectively, and that's what this was meant to do. Make sure that artifacts and graveyard shenanigans can't happen, and then just try to get better and better tokens on the field. This deck did really well back when I was playing it. I haven't played it for a while. It would probably have to change a little bit because meta has changed since this deck came out. Also, and this is just a note off to the side, right? If you're playing best of one and you get mana screwed, you lose. If you're playing best of one and you flood, you lose. If you're playing best of three, you have another shot. What are the chances that you get flooded or screwed 3 times in a row and your opponent just has wonderful draws all the way throughout that stuff? It's next to non-existent on the odds, and that is super important to remember, especially if you're worried about rank at all. If you are worried about rank and you're flooding all the time or getting mana screwed and getting pushed out of matches, and this could happen 7 or 8 times in a row. I've had that happen playing best of one. In best of three, it rarely ever happens that every single match or 2 of the 3 matches I'm just screwed. It happens. It does. It will always happen in Magic the Gathering, but the chances of it are greatly diminished. Whereas in best of one, your chances are, shall we say, 40%, 50%? And each time you draw a new hand, 40% of the time it's going to be garbage. 60% of the time it's going to be playable. So it gives you more of a chance to see more cards, to see more lands, and that takes us to our topper for this video, which is that a lot of the time when you're going into something, and we know the slivers are not good. Just recently, I went into a historic event and went up against slivers, where they actually absolutely demolished me in the first round. Absolutely 100% demolished me, but I had enough things in the sideboard to make slivers terrible, absolutely abysmally bad. Which means that a lot of the decks that you see that are kind of memey, like slivers are a memey deck, and they're good if you don't expect them, but once you do expect them, they're no longer good. If you are playing in ranked and you don't expect somebody to bring a deck like this into it, and you lose, you're gonna feel really bad. And then you have to, at the end of that round, you have to forget everything that you knew about that deck, because that player is going on to the next match, as will you, unless you just rage quit and leave. And then let's say you face another kind of deck. Maybe you're looking at this deck right here, and this is your next match. Well, you go in, and then they gain control of your creature, swing with it, sack it, and deal 3 damage to your face, and you die. Another meme just beat you, and that's a real feels bad moment. This could happen over and over and over again without your ability to react. But in best of 3, and the real reason why I play best of 3 is I don't have to 100% know what the opponent is playing in their first round. In fact, the first round, a lot of times I'm just trying to feel the opponent out. I'm going to make some awkward moves in the first round. Like, we might run into some make disappears, right? We might run out an invasion of New Phyrexia with not a whole lot of support to actually flip it into Teferi. We might be making those awkward plays because we want our opponent to be off guard. We also just want to know what the opponent has in their deck. Of course, we're still trying to win that first game, because if you win the first game, the pressure is on your opponent. But the first game does allow you to get an understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then between rounds be able to go through and get the tools like Destroy Evil to get rid of Shieldreds, both of the Shieldreds now, Mondrakes and stuff like that, Fateful Absences to get rid of Planeswalkers, Negates, Essence Scatters, Essence Scatters specifically for Atraxa, Lord of the Third Path to get rid of the crazy artifacts that are coming around. All of this stuff really allows you to observe your opponent, see what they are playing, and then pull it back around in game 2 and 3, pull the tools that you need to make the deck effective into your deck, and then go for round 2 with a better understanding of their deck. And let me tell you, whenever you're playing best of 3, the first round, well, you don't know anything about your opponent's deck. They don't know anything about yours. It's, if you play well, over 50% of the time you're going to win. If you play poorly or you face a bad matchup, yeah, maybe 50%, maybe 40% win rate. But you always have that sideboard to pick up the slack in the places where you went wrong. And I love that about best of 3, because getting surprised by a card or a deck can significantly weaken your win rate. And on Arena, your ability to win often, more often than you lose, is highly encouraged by Wizards of the Coast because of different events that are on. And this is true in real life as well. Whenever you go to events, you get more awards for the more wins that you get. And it is the same on Arena. Now, let's top things off and look at, let's say, the events. I actually would say something differently about drafting, and that's for a different video. We don't have time to get into that, But if you look at the historic event, this one makes you go until you've lost 3 rounds. 7 wins and 3 losses, that's a big ask, especially in best of 1. And the reason I say that is you get a surprise deck that you just cannot handle, and you don't have a sideboard to go get that one card you need in order to win. Well, you just lost the first round. Then if that happens 2 more times before you win 7, they're asking for a 70% win rate. Actually, a little bit more than that, more like a 77% win rate, because get your 3rd loss, you're done, right? They're asking for a 70% win rate to get here. Now, let's go over to the traditional historic event, and I'm going to say something that's probably controversial here, but I think it is much easier to do this, to get this. And I'm going to tell you why. So you go into the first round, you lose 1, you win 2. You lose 1, you win 2. You lose 1, you win 2. You would already be out in the standard draft, or the best of 1 draft. You would be already out. Well, this is not a draft, this is a historic event, but you would already be dead. And you wouldn't actually probably have the opportunity to reach down and grab those wins anyway. If you lose the first round here, and it moves you on to the next one, you lose the first round here, and then you move on to the next one, you lose the first round here. In the best of 1 thing, you're already dead. But let's say you lose the first round and then win the next 2 because you had that perfect piece on the sideboard. And then same here, you lose the first round and you win the next 2. And you lose the first round and you win the next 2. You're still going. You're still going. You're still moving through the event, and you have a much higher probability of actually taking some of those wins. And we're just going to wrap up what we kind of talked about, which is, first off, best of 1, if you're trying to smash your opponent fast, if you're trying to just surprise your opponent with a deck that they weren't expecting, best of 1 is the best place to do that. If you're trying to increase your win rate overall, best of 3 is the best place to do that because it gives you more of an opportunity to use your sideboard to great effect. And then number 3, because of the increased win rate, you'll be able to participate in events a lot more, what would you call it, consistently? Sure, we're going to go with consistently. You're going to be able to participate in this stuff and not lose nearly as often as you could in best of 1, where you could just literally just be burning your currency, man. You really can. But in best of 3, it at least gives you the option if you have built your sideboard right. Again, that could be another video. But it allows you the option to actually win. I hope this video was helpful. If I did miss something, please put it down below. If you disagree, please put it down below and we could have an open debate on this thing, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that think best of 1 is the right way. That's just not me. That's just not my play style. I prefer to have more control over my win rate than the luck that needs to happen whenever you're playing best of 1. I don't leave much up to luck, even in my personal life. So if we're trying to build our economy, why would I try to rely on luck on this? I don't do it in real life. I'm not going to do it here that often. And I know there's going to be people that disagree. They're like, CoffeeStout. That's totally untrue. Best of 1 is more skill-based than best of 3. Or vice versa. You know, whatever you think is true, put it down below and we'll open a debate, because guess what? Magic the Gathering is a game and there is no one right way to play. But this is personally what I think about the differences between best of 1 and best of 3. Thank you for watching today. Make sure that you've liked the video and subscribed to the channel, and I will see you next time in the arena. Bye.